So why do I write? I basically write because of my complete inability not to. I have no ability to stop myself from writing. Not that I want to. I don't want to stop myself from writing. But basically I can't stop myself from writing. Writing is something that I just want to do every day. I'm under no illusions whatsoever that my writing is ever going to be good enough to be published. Nobody is ever going to read my work and tell me that they want me to sign a publishing deal and give me an advance and you know, pay me for my manuscripts. Of course they're not. My work simply isn't that good. The only way that anything I write would be published is if I were to publish it myself by simply putting it on the internet somewhere, on a blog or something, or possibly on an ebook. I wouldn't do that either because my work simply isn't good enough for public consumption. And not only that, but my low self-esteem basically means that I wouldn't expose myself to public ridicule if they were to read my work and hate it because it simply wasn't very good. I ask myself quite regularly, you know, there are no real incentives for me to write. Am I incentivized to write because I'm ever going to get paid for writing? No. Am I incentivized to write because I will earn fame from it? No. Am I incentivized to write because somebody one day is going to, you know, herald me as the next great literary genius? No, of course not. So I don't actually have any sort of exterior incentives to write. I just write because I love to write. I write because I have a great deal of imagination, because my head is full of characters, full of stories, full of situations. Are they visions? I suppose you could say visions. I mean, you know, what exactly is the definition of a vision? If you look out of the window and see the sun in the sky, is that a vision? Is it reality? If you look out the window and instead of seeing the sun in the sky, what you can see is a whole world full of people who don't actually exist other than in your imagination. Is that a vision? Possibly. But I like my creativity. It keeps me company. It makes me feel warm. It makes me feel like I have a skill or a talent that my pen and the words on the paper in front of me can bring to life people that don't exist. I am a god in that sense. If you believe that God gave birth to the human race, well, is a writer not a god in that sense? I can give birth, I can conceive and give birth to any man, any woman, any child, any animal that exists and put them into any situation I choose. I can also conceive and give birth to animals that don't exist, creatures that don't exist, situations that they simply don't exist, you know. I can create a new species of human being that could take over the earth. I can do anything. And maybe that is the appeal. Maybe the way that I live my life, which is fairly secluded, and because of my shyness and my mental health problems, maybe the creativity that I love is something that keeps me company. You know, maybe that is a result, the way that I live my life, and the creativity is a result of not having people, not having contact, not being in situations with friends and loved ones and stuff like this. And so therefore I create my own characters, and those characters are controlled by me. Who knows? That's a much deeper issue that I guess a psychiatrist or a psychologist could probably only answer those questions. But is my creativity a problem? I sometimes feel that my creativity is a problem. I sometimes worry that I like to be alone so that I can write my stories, because actually it's not about writing stories, it's about avoiding real life and real life problems. I don't know if that's true. Sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes I feel, why am I sitting in my property on my own, scribbling away at things that nobody else is ever going to see, nobody else is ever going to appreciate? But more and more recently, I've just come to accept that I do it because I just want to. And if you just want to do something, and if something gives you pleasure and makes you smile and feel good about yourself, then why not do it? It doesn't actually matter that doing that means I have to be alone to do it. I guess those feelings are the kind of feelings that most writers, successful writers or unsuccessful writers, have. Writing, by definition of what it is, means that you have to spend a lot of time alone to do it. You can't really be creative in a room full of noisy people. To some extent, I mean, you can sit in a coffee shop perhaps with coffee shop noise and screaming children and have an exercise book in front of you and scribble away at your stories. I guess you can do that, but for me, my creativity is heightened by quiet and stillness and solitude. So creativity can be a problem, and of course there is a history amongst creative people of mental illness, of depression, of suicide. You think of some of the world's greatest artists, painters, sculptors, poets, writers, and a great many of them have this one thread in common, that their creativity seems to come hand in hand with mental health problems, depression, suicide, drug misuse, alcohol misuse. There seems to be a much higher percentage of creative people who suffer from those things. So, I wonder if my problems with my mental health, and obviously I've had a great deal of anxiety in my life. I'm now currently being treated for a dissociative disorder, and I wonder if my creativity has actually contributed to my mental health problems. And unfortunately, at this moment in time, I believe they probably have. I believe that, well, certainly, a dissociative disorder, a disorder that sort of disconnects you from reality. I'm no psychologist, but if you have a very vivid imagination in the first place, I would imagine that it would probably be much easier for you to contract, if that's the right word, and suffer with a dissociative disorder, because you already have a vivid imagination. You already can create characters and situations that aren't really there. And a dissociative disorder, well, there are many forms of dissociative disorders, but the dissociative disorder that I seem to have is certainly linked to imagination, is certainly linked to drifting off and daydreaming and finding yourself becoming other people in situations that aren't necessarily real. So certainly there appears to be a massive link between sort of creativity and mental health problems. Would I swap my creativity to rid myself of those problems? This is something that I've thought a great deal about. If somebody said to me, if we took away all of your creativity so that you couldn't write and you couldn't invent characters and you couldn't, when you go for a 3-hour walk, because incidentally, I do a lot of writing in my head, if writing in your head is possible. I do a lot of writing in my head when I walk, and I've always found that walking, for some reason, seems to shift and unlock valves or taps within my brain that switch on my creativity. So walking for me is something that I do a great deal of. When I go for a 3-hour walk and my imagination starts to run wild, I create characters and situations and stories in my head. And would I swap? If somebody could get rid of all of my creativity in return for me not having mental health problems, would I do that? At this moment in time, I would probably say yes. I'd probably say yes, please take away all of my creativity and my imagination so that I can actually not have anxiety disorder, not have a dissociative disorder and obsessive compulsive disorders. At this moment in time, September the 13th at 7:41 p.m, I would say yes, take away all of my creativity and all of my imagination and leave me with no imagination at all in return for ridding me of all of my mental health problems. However, I think that is probably a fleeting opinion, because I know that this is a question that I've asked myself in the past a great deal, and my answer has always been no. I wouldn't like to lose my creativity and imagination in return for normal mental faculties. Although, of course, what is normal mental faculties? Who knows? Does anybody know what a normal brain, feels like? I don't think we really do. So in the past, I would say no, please don't take my imagination and creativity. And you know what? Tomorrow morning, my opinion will probably be different as it is to the opinion that I have tonight, and I would probably wake up tomorrow morning and say, actually, I would settle for the difficulties of mental health as long as I can keep my imagination, because my imagination and my creativity is such a massive part of who I am. I can't imagine sitting at my desk in front of a pad of A4 paper and not being able to think up things that don't exist other than within the interior of my own self. So my creativity is welcome. I love it. My creativity has always been with me. At primary school, I was always the king of the short stories. The teacher would, twice a week, the teacher would get the class to basically write a story. He would write a title on the blackboard and tell everyone to write a story, and every week my stories were the best stories, So even at primary school, my imagination was immense, and it still is, and my imagination was the sharp edge of the imagination was dulled somewhat at secondary school by the fact that English class at secondary school was never a creative thing. We never had any creative processes in English. It was always, read a book, write an essay about the book, but it was never, write a short story, write poetry, write, make stuff up. So secondary school certainly dulled my creativity. But then, I would go home after school and I would write stories and I would create characters. And if I wasn't actually writing them, I would be, sitting at home watching television, but sort of thinking about things that I'd like to create. So it's interesting. Creativity is a very interesting thing. I think creativity is certainly something that you can't teach somebody. You either are creative or you're not. I mean, at primary school, as I mentioned, the whole class was set the task of writing stories. Well, every kid in the class could actually pick up a pen and write a story. But a lot of the stories weren't very good. They were the kind of stories that most kids would have probably seen on television and maybe copied a little in their own words. And that's because some of the kids in class just had no creativity and imagination, and one or two of us did. So you can get anybody to write a story, but if you have no imagination and no creativity, the story's not going to be very good, or it's not going to be original. In the same way that you can teach any human being to play a guitar. You can teach any human being to play the chords on a guitar, but if you don't have the natural talent and the natural skill to play that guitar, well, you're not going to be a guitar player. You're just going to be somebody who was taught how to play some chords. I mean, you know, there's a reason why there's only one Jimi Hendrix. There's a reason why there's only one Eric Clapton. You know, there's a reason why there's only one Slash. That's because these people are born gifted guitar players and musicians. You can teach somebody to play a guitar, but you can't teach them to be Jimi Hendrix, or you can't teach them to play a guitar like Jimi Hendrix. In the same way that you can teach somebody to write a play, but they're never going to write a play like Shakespeare. You can teach somebody how to sing a song in some sort of tune, but, you know, they're never going to be Frank Sinatra, right? That's because these people that I've mentioned were born with a natural gift for their field. And as I said, you can teach anybody to write a story, but if you've got no creative talent, the story's not going to be up to much. So, creativity, it's a very strange thing. I do love my creativity. I question my creativity. Sometimes I sit down and I spend hours writing a story, and then I think to myself, why am I doing this? Because nobody else is ever going to see it. Nobody else is ever going to read my words and appreciate anything that I've written. And yet I've spent 4 hours filling this A4 paper with words, and sometimes I feel, are these words completely pointless? Are they meaningless? Do they mean nothing? After all, if you produce something and you're the only human being on Earth who ever sees that something, does that something become meaningless? I mean, if Botticelli had painted the birth of Venus and he'd kept it locked away in a cupboard until he died, and then it was destroyed and nobody ever saw it, would the birth of Venus be a pointless work of art? Or was the birth of Venus an important work of art just because it was produced? Not that I'm comparing my scribbles to Botticelli's paintings, but you know what I mean. It's an interesting question. If you produce a work of art and nobody else ever sees it, is that work of art worthwhile? Well, my answer to that would be, it's worthwhile to me because producing that thing, those words on that paper, actually gives me pleasure, makes me smile, makes me happy. At the moment, maybe not so, because as I said, I would trade my creativity for, ridding myself of the mental health problems that I suffer with. But tomorrow that will probably be different, and then the day after it'll be different again. But that's just fleeting feelings. When I write, I am absolutely immersed in what I write, and it doesn't matter to me that nobody will ever read what I write, because what matters to me is simply that I write it. That's the thing. The thrill is not just the words when I finish. The thrill is sitting in front of a pad of A4 paper that's completely blank with my pen sitting on the top, and seeing that blank piece of paper in the same way that an artist sees a blank canvas. That blank canvas of the paper can be turned into anything. I can create worlds, I can create planets, I can create universes, I can create castles and knights and spaceships and any manner of anything I want to. I mean, if you have an imagination, there's no limit to the world that you can create, and that is such a beautiful, wonderful... It's a gift, imagination is a gift. There's no doubt about that, and creativity is a gift. Unfortunately, it's a gift that seems to come with a downside, which is, as I said before, many creative people suffer with mental health problems. Maybe my creativity is driving my mental health problems, I don't know. My fear, and I'm going to bring this ramble to an end now because it's getting quite long. My fear is that as I receive treatment for my dissociative disorder, my fear is that the treatment may diminish my imagination and diminish my creativity, which would be a terrible, terrible thing for me. I hope that's not true. I hope that the dissociative disorder can be sort of separated from my creativity and my imagination, can be dealt with in almost in a separate box, you know. Because what gives me hope is that my dissociative disorder began to develop in my early 20s. I'm now 38, but as I said before, I've always been a very creative person. My first memories of being 7 or 8 years old is loving getting an exercise book from the teacher and a pencil and being told to just write a story. So I feel that my creativity and imagination was with me before I got my dissociative disorder. So I feel like it will be, you know, it will still be there once it's gone. Now that's certainly my hope, because clearing up my dissociative disorder would be wonderful. But if it's cleared up at the expense of my imagination and creativity, I think my life would certainly lose the quality that it has, that my creativity and my writing brings to me.